Theism versus atheism has been a major debate topic for decades, both sides continually laying out new arguments for why they are right and the other is wrong. On any position or argument, you can oftentimes find a plethora of reasonable objections on either side. However, there has been a long deserted voice in this conversation, one that I think can help settle the debate once and for all. Bashing your opponent for his or her position is oftentimes worthless. In fact, presenting bulletproof logical arguments oftentimes falls short of convincing someone deeply rooted in their opinion that they're wrong. Something that has really helped me in this ongoing conversation between atheism and theism is asking and answering the question why. You can't simply tell someone that they're wrong without explaining to them why. And I don't mean amassing a mountain of evidence to prove your point. I mean telling them why it is that they are convinced of their own evidence. This will become more apparent throughout the video, so let me start by asking that question, why? Why do you believe in a God? Why as humanity do we believe in gods? There are very few aspects of the human experience that transcend both time and culture. Religion is one of those aspects. You can travel to almost anywhere in the world at any time within the last 10,000 years and find people worshiping something. Something that's present in an organism to such a large degree couldn't have been there by accident. It must have been selected for. So why? Religion and mythologies are a byproduct of the origins of consciousness, specifically autobiographical memory. With the expansion of certain lobes of the brain, we became capable of what's considered autobiographical memory, which is essentially the ability to project oneself into the future and into the past. This is a very unique ability that's most well embodied by humans. We can think of the consequences of our actions. We can go back in time and feel embarrassment at who we were a few years ago. Other organisms don't have that ability. Another thing that it enables us to do is to contemplate our own death. This opens us up to the reality that we are in fact finite beings. Recognizing one's own death is monumental to a biological organism. Organisms and species aren't built for stimulus like this. As living creatures, our sole purpose is to survive and reproduce. When there's a threatening stimulus that arises in our environment, it's dealt with immediately. So when the knowledge of death is introduced, we run into this stimulus that no matter what we do cannot be dealt with. As a result, the human animal has developed various coping mechanisms to help alleviate the death stimulus. Just like most complex evolutionary features, consciousness developed over time, and with it, we needed to find ways to patch that hole of the death stimulus. Some of the early steps of this process can be seen in oral tradition. Oral tradition was a direct link to the past, to our ancestors, and to our loved ones. It facilitated a kind of mentorship between history and the present. This is a remarkable ability that humanity has been able to tap into. It's why we can progress so much and we seem so disproportionately ahead of all these other organisms. Because I don't have to build a computer and a desk and a phone in order to make YouTube videos. I can use the creation of other people and their inventions and build on that. As bands of a few hundred humans became more prevalent, certain individuals in their communities became immortalized in what is known as ancestor worship. Now, no one knows exactly why or how ancestor worship originated, but I'm going to take a crack at it, kind of taking a more evolutionary perspective. And I want to warn you right now that it's about to get pretty thick. So from an evolutionary perspective, if an organism possesses advantageous traits, it has the opportunity to pass those on, and in a way, due to its reproductive capabilities and success, it becomes immortalized. Its genes now get to exist in another organism and potentially forever, or at least for a very long time, completely outliving the original organism. But as Yuval Noah Harari mentions in his book Sapiens, humans have transcended the genome and thus transcended traditional evolutionary mechanisms. Humanity's new and primary mechanism of evolution is social evolution. This theory is reinforced by Carl Jung in what he calls the collective consciousness, which I think is just another word for social evolution. So taking everything into consideration, let's wrap all this up. If a traditional, evolutionarily successful organism succeeds based on its biological advantageous traits, then an organism that succeeds in social evolution does so due to its social contributions or its social traits. So this is a little bit abstract. Let's apply this to some examples. What does this look like in a human? So essentially what I described before is a hero in mythology. And first we're going to start with an example of hunter-gatherers as heroes, and then we're going to move to Jesus as the prime example of a hero. So if a hunter-gatherer from thousands of years ago exhibited some advantageous social behavior, the theory that I mentioned before would suggest its prevalence and its impact on future generations. So let's say a hunter-gatherer inevitably runs into psychedelic mushrooms. So let's say he consumes this mushroom, he has a crazy abstract experience, and at the end he feels much more connected to the universe. Another side effect is that it kind of eases his fear of death because of his connectedness to this kind of fabric of the universe that we can't see. And these are actually documented reactions and memories from psychedelic trips. This behavior is then reinforced not by reproduction but by his followers that look at him and are like, wow, he seems like a different person, like he's almost awakened and that he no longer has this fear of death. And people follow that. People want to experience that. And that is the mechanism of reproduction for this social behavior. As a result, the legacy of this hunter-gatherer, who we may now call a shaman, has been passed on for multiple reasons. First is that he embodies an active exploration for the understanding of humanity and our purpose on Earth. Second is that he eases that death stimulus, which is extremely important, being one of our biggest unconscious or conscious fears. Lastly, he further promotes social cohesion by kind of creating a following, a group of people that are all unified under a collective experience. The legacy of these hunter-gatherers, known as shamans, is still alive today, and more evidence comes out every single year pointing towards a shamanistic origins of religions like Christianity and how psychedelics have actually had a major impact in shaping them. Speaking of Christianity, why has it been so successful? So let's use Jesus as an example of our hero or socially advantageous character and figure out why it is that he is so compelling and so believable. So what does Jesus bring to the table? He brings a ton, and in different ways than we've ever seen before out of any religion. He brings it to an absolute extreme, as we'll see. First, that he promotes social cohesion and helps people live together, work together, and just all around get along. As people groups expanded, religion became extremely important for maintaining that social cohesion, and as a result, religion went through a kind of Darwinian style of evolution where the most believable strains of religion were the ones that were most successful. Second is that he didn't just ease death, he beat death in that resurrection. He beat our most fundamental fear as self-conscious beings. This is huge and monumental and wasn't really seen before. Death is a universal human fear, whether it be conscious or unconscious. Religions used to primarily deal with more mundane things like, crop fertility, for example, or the weather. These were extremely vital to the lifestyles of more primitive hunter-gatherers or traditional religions, but as humans advanced, their priorities shifted. Jesus and other similar heroes, by beating death, were showing themselves as humanity's savior, not just this village's savior, or not just the god of the crops. This is another reason why Christianity became so popular, and it also is part of the reason for that shift from polytheism to monotheism, and embodying all these characteristics into one powerful God that can beat death instead of a whole bunch of individuals. Ancient hunter-gatherers who practiced ancestor worship had an extremely dynamic relationship with the past. The stories of their gods were continually restructured and edited as they ran into new problems and new situations. Insightful, socially advantageous individuals who came along, also known as prophets or sons of God, had their stories and their contributions permanently ingrained in those belief systems. Similarly, Christians have had an extremely dynamic relationship with the myth of Jesus. It has continually changed and adapted to solve our more modern problems. Nonetheless, the legacy is still ingrained in every single person, regardless of their conscious belief or lack thereof. To make a long story short, we are socially, evolutionarily predisposed to believe in a God, not just because of the advantages it gives us in reproduction, but because the answers it provides for our most profound fears.